Years and a shocking revelation, his longtime friend and fellow actor Robert Duvall finally broke his silence on Hackman's troubled life and mysterious death. The truth is not what fans were expecting. Gene Hackman, 95, was one of Hollywood's most respected yet elusive figures. He dominated the screen with raw intensity but remained an enigma off-camera death. Behind the accolades and towering performances, however, was a man tormented by his own demons. Duvall's words depict a guy who, in spite of his skill, was consumed by anger, loneliness, and an internal conflict that he never prevailed in, leaving his soul devastated. When Robert Duvall and G. Hackman first met at the Pasadena Playhouse in the 1950s, Duvall saw something different in Hackman, a fire within him, an unrelenting force that made him both captivating and volatile even as a young actor. Hackman carried an unspoken burden, a simmering intensity that never allowed him to settle. When Duvall finally broke his silence about his late friend, his words painted a tragic picture of a tormented guy who was always into his own space, his own thing, and not just a personality. Their friendship lasted for decades, but it was never the kind of relationship that was based on warm exchanges or sentimental reunions. Strangely enough, it was a reflection of something much more profound. Hackman wasn't just motivated. He was obsessed, and every character he played was a continuation of his internal conflict. Because of his obsessive behavior, he didn't simply act. He became someone who wanted perfection from everyone around him as well as from himself. Hackman's temper was legendary, earning him the nickname Vesuvius because he could blow up at any time if a director hesitated, a co-star didn't match his energy, or the atmosphere on set didn't feel right. However, this rage wasn't the result of arrogance. Rather, it came from something more complex that Duvall always saw lurking behind his friend's piercing gaze. In many ways, Hackman's isolation was a necessity for him. He didn't trust or forgive easily, and he never let himself slow down, not even for those who cared about him. Because of this, Hackman never forgot the people who doubted and underestimated him. He carried those memories with him, using them as fuel, but they also became chains around his neck. In the end, when Hackman vanished from Hollywood and locked himself away in New Mexico, his success never felt like enough, even after winning Oscars and proving himself to the world. Duvall wasn't surprised. It was only the last deed of a guy who had fled from something he could never get away from, something that started when you were little, like the Marine Corps and a mother's destruction. Robert Duvall's revelation on G. Hackman covered more than just his friend's last years. It also covered the struggle that molded him throughout his life. Not only was Hackman a man with a temper, but he also supported Ed during his difficult beginnings, which began long before Hollywood. Although the world viewed him as a strong, towering figure, below that was a young child who had discovered too early that people leave when their father deserts them. Hackman's enlistment in the U.S. Marine Corps at the age of 16 was a desperate attempt to regain some control over his life and restore a sense of belonging that had been torn away when his father left. However, in doing so, he left behind another wound that never fully healed. When Hackman's mother found out, she was devastated. It wasn't just that he had left, but how abruptly he had disappeared from her life, just as she had lost her husband. The emotional impact was so great that those close to the family later described it in stark terms. He killed her. His revelations were terrible. They showed a man who had been alone since he was a small child, something that had never left him. Even decades later, Duvall saw in his friend the Hackman that he wasn't just a difficult man, but a man carrying the weight of a decision that had set him on a path he could never quite step away from. This sense of unresolved turmoil followed him through Hollywood, into his relationships, and finally into his lonely final years, a life of isolation, as he revealed that Gene rarely talked about his upbringing. However, it was evident from the excerpts he shared over the years that it had a significant influence on him and shaped him into the man who wanted to fight against the world. Robert Duvall's revelation about Gene Hackman wasn't just about his career or his legendary temper, it was about the loneliness that had followed him like a shadow for his entire life from the moment Hackman entered Hollywood. There was something different about him. He wasn't like other actors who craved attention or the limelight. He wanted respect, but he didn't want friendship. He wanted control, but he didn't want connection. This was a man who built walls around himself so high that even those closest to him struggled to break through. Dustin Hoffman, who had known Hackman since their early acting days, once recounted a chilling detail about their friendship. They would go out together, but Hackman would suddenly excuse himself, saying, "Only I got to go." Hoffman eventually learned what that meant. Hackman needed to fight. He would find a bar, pick a target, and start something. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about unleashing something, about burning off the restless self-destructive energy that never seemed to leave him even in a room full of people. As his career took off, Hackman became even more reclusive. He worked tirelessly, giving his all to his roles, but once filming was over, he kept to himself. Unlike other celebrities who surrounded themselves with entourages and industry friends, Hackman didn't attend Hollywood parties, he didn't smooth with producers, he didn't care about networking. He saw the industry as a job, and when he finally had enough, he walked away from it, all without hesitation, disappearing into the peaceful solitude of rural New Mexico. There was a lot of truth in Duvall's remarks on his old acquaintance. The fact that Gene always kept himself hidden from everyone, including his loved ones, wasn't a decision. Rather, it was his fate. Robert Duvall's revelation about Gone Hackman marked the end of the lonely. What many had long assumed was hauntingly confirmed by his revelations regarding the star's last days. Unlike other retired actors who would occasionally surface for interviews or tributes, Hackman's reclusiveness became almost mythic in his later years. There were no memoirs, no reflections on his storied career, no red carpet appearances, and fans would occasionally spot him running errands. But those moments were fleeting, and he never acknowledged them. He even moved to New Mexico, shunning the Hollywood lifestyle altogether, and the news that shocked those who still remembered him came at the end of Hackman's life, which had been filled with tension and distance for decades. The most disturbing aspect was that Hackman, his wife, and one of their dogs were discovered dead in their house. It seemed as though they had been there for days or perhaps weeks before anyone noticed them. When Duvall finally talked about his friend's death, his words carried the weight of something inevitable. He died the way he lived alone. Hackman had spent his life excluding people, pushing away connections, and withdrawing into himself. When the end came, no one was left to knock on his door or ask if he was still alive. The vanishing act, the last revelation, was Gene Hackman's best performance, not in front of the camera. The most heartbreaking of all may be Robert Duvall's last remarks regarding G. Hackman. His silence over the years wasn't just out of respect. Rather, it was because the truth was too painful to face. When he did speak, it wasn't to remember Hackman's illustrious career or his acting prowess, but rather, to acknowledge the deeper tragedy that defined his friend's life. Hackman had spent his years pursuing greatness, recognition, and perfection, but in the end, it had all come at an intolerable cost. He was perhaps one of the few people Hackman led into his life. The man Hollywood saw on screen was only one aspect of him. Underneath, he was someone who had never been able to fully let go of his past, never able to shake the feeling that he was still fighting against something invisible, something that no amount of success could erase. Duvall didn't sugarcoat it. He knew Hackman better than most and had witnessed him at both his most brilliant and his most solitary. When Hackman turned his back on Hollywood, many felt it was a tranquil retirement, a decision to leave the profession on his own terms. But Duvall's remarks imply something completely different. His mother's destruction and the years of struggle that followed him formed and ultimately destroyed him. Hackman didn't retire. Instead, he vanished, and when he passed away, he was found alone and silent in a world he had created to keep others out. This is a terrible reality, but it cannot be denied. The true tragedy of Gene Hackman's life, as Duvall finally acknowledged, was that he was a legend who never really found peace. Do you think that Gene Hackman struggled with fame? Did he feel alone and isolated? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.